Shall I test my screen sharing just to make sure?
Feel free if you'd like to.
Sure. I should do it, and that's more or less me, typos and all. So here we go.
Great, we can see that.
Splendid. I'll stop sharing.
And I see Stephen Mackey as well.
Hello.
Good morning, Stephen. Would you like to test your, we hear you, your audio works. Would you like to test your screen sharing?
Certainly, yes. Let me just put this into presenter mode.
Hi, Steve. Nice to see you.
Hi, Jenny. How are you doing?
Yeah, all right, thanks.
This very strange situation we're in.
Yes.
Right. Let's see.
Where are you calling us from, Steve?
From France.
I thought you might be somewhere.
Which is where I live now. Yeah.
There's a lot of sunshine in that room, it seems.
Not today.
No? Okay.
We just got back. Well, we're in northern Finisterre, so it tends to be a bit variable. We just got back from holiday yesterday, so we've been further south and it was lovely. But today it's kind of cloudy.
Right.
How's that?
Yes, works.
Excellent. Okay, so just make sure I can. There we go. Yep.
Is that everyone, Niels? Have we got everyone now?
I think so. Yeah. Stephen should also have a co-presenter, I think. Hannah.
That's right.
Yep.
Anna-Marie's there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
And, Sarah Day Thompson.
I don't think she's here yet.
That's the co-presenter of Kaylin Smith.
I've definitely seen her today though, so I'm sure she's around.
Okay.
She won't be far away.
Still 5 whole minutes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm just gonna go and get a drink. Excuse me for a moment.
It does feel like a conference schedule though. You kind of, run out of your Zoom room to go to the bathroom or a coffee and run back.
So if all the speakers are there, yeah, we wait for 5 more minutes till we start. But it saves time for the introduction. If I say it now, you probably already know it. But there's 8 minutes for every speaker. And there's 1 minute for handover to the next speaker. And after each presentation, there is 1 minute for a quick question and an answer. And well, I'll be the chair today, so I will take a look at the time and introduce the speakers. And Jen Mitchum will take a look at the chat box. So 8 minutes for every presentation, and if you're at 7 minutes, I will brutally ring this nice Christmas bell, and then you know there's 1 minute left, and then to finish up the presentation. We saw that in the introduction on Friday, so I looked up at my attic for a nice Christmas bell, and well.
What are you doing?
Back. So is anybody doing the iPres bingo or digital preservation bingo card today? How are we getting on? I don't think I'm doing very well so far.
No, there is a bingo card, Jen.
Yes. It's on Twitter.
Oh, I missed it.
Yeah.
It does the rounds every iPres.
I think I remember this from last year.
Can you win something, Jen?
No, I don't think there's a prize, unfortunately, apart from the pleasure of, having ticked everything off.
Yeah, you can win the adulation of all your digital preservation colleagues.
Absolutely, yeah.
Something like that. So I don't know what was happening in this room before, but I just entered it to Rachel McGregor in the chat box saying she doesn't usually hang the washing out in the conference breaks.
That made me laugh.
Yeah, it's nice that you can do that sort of thing from home.
It's nice that it's nice enough out that you can do that as well.
Yeah. Oh, Ali's been doing her ironing. Wow. Impressive.
So what time is it now in Australia then? It's the middle of the night, right?
It's actually only 7:35. So it's not too bad.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the good time difference. We're about to head into the bad time difference where it's 9 hours, which is harder.
Right, I can imagine. Well, that's not too bad. That's still though. That's tea time.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like my partner's making me dinner right now, so
Oh,
I'll be
nice
fine.
one. Nice one.
So we're going to start now. It's at least here it's 11:35. It's 0.35 everywhere, I think.
Yeah.
Welcome everybody. My name is Niels Komen. I work for the Regionaal Archief Zutphen. That's in the Netherlands. That's a local archival institution. And I will be your chair for this session. And the co-chair will be Jen Mitchum, and she will especially take a look at the chat for the questions. And we will have 5 speakers this hour about COVID-19 and digital preservation. What of course has affected all of our lives this year. I hope every one of you is doing well. And it's also a time where history is being made, and we have to document this and keep the memory alive. So I'm sure we're all curious about how today's speakers will contribute to this. Well, I think you've all been instructed to use the mute option in Zoom, and to mute your sound and video. And you can use the chat for questions. After the 5 presentations, there will be a Q&A for about 15 minutes. And then you can raise hands, or we'll take the questions from the chat. So first speaker is Natalie Harrower from the Digital Repository of Ireland. Natalie, I want to invite you to share screen and go ahead.
Okay, how's that looking?
Looking good.
Good to go. I'm going to start my timer as well to avoid your bell. Hi, everyone. So the title of my presentation is Sharing COVID-19 Research Data, the Role for Digital Preservation. So that's me. I'm the director of the Digital Repository of Ireland, but I was also, or still am also, a co-chair of this working group as part of the Research Data Alliance that's working on how to better share data, software, and other research outputs on COVID-19. So just a bit about the group. It was brought together at the request of the European Commission. So the European Commission came to RDA and said, could you put this kind of group together? And RDA is about building the social and technical bridges to enable better data sharing. It's a global group with over 10,000 members. A lot of you are probably familiar with it. So the objectives of this working group were to develop recommendations for policymakers and funders at a higher level to enable timely data and software sharing during this current pandemic, but also, for future pandemics, and also at the same time to provide very detailed guidelines to researchers about how to better practice data and software sharing, granular kinds of details. So the RDA said yes, and the working group was set up within weeks. There were 600 members that joined. We created 4 different research areas and 4 themes that cut across these research areas. They each had chairs and moderators. And over the course of about 10 weeks, there were 6 releases of the document with an open public consultation online, very iterative process. We ended up with a large 143-page document, but there is a 4-page executive summary if you want to take a look at that. I put some links in the chat box and various tools. So my role was to chair the editorial team. Moving on. Oops, next slide. There we go. So what were the challenges that are being faced? Well, there's a critical need for rapid data sharing. And I think publicly, it's never been more clear how important it is to share research data under this because of the global nature of what we're facing. A pandemic doesn't know any borders, and therefore research can't either. So how do we do this in a timely way, in a precise way? Faced with the other challenge, which is that we don't have any harmonized or universal standards or context for sharing this kind of data, for collecting and documenting and disseminating it. So these are the main challenges being faced. As I said, it was a wide effort. So the 4 research areas are clinical, omics, epidemiology, and social sciences. And then we also looked at things in the community like contact tracing apps, research software sharing. There's a section on Indigenous data guidelines, taking that into consideration when it comes to sharing data and collecting data, and also wider legal and ethical considerations that cut across all of these different areas. So incredibly cross-disciplinary effort to bring these together with the open public consultation. We also came up with what we call foundational recommendations. You'll see that in the document. So these are key recommendations that we pulled from what the different research areas were saying and put at the beginning of the document. I won't go into these here. You can look at the links, but what I'm going to pull from them is what I observed for digital preservation. So this is the purpose of this presentation today. Have to move my little Zoom thing around to be able to read my own screen here. So one of the quotes that I think is important is that in the current emergency context, it is a moral imperative to preserve the data and share it in the most open way possible for each case. And this sounds like an obvious statement, but the fact that the word preserve is in there, I think is really key. And we in preservation circles should pay attention to that because we've been saying it for a long time. You can't just share data. You can't just put it out there on a website. You actually have to preserve it properly. And this came out of the different researchers working in these groups across the board, the importance of this going forward. A few other things to highlight. And so one of them is that in those foundational elements that, again, we pulled from the different areas, mentions of fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable were all over the place. Mentions of domain-specific metadata, trustworthy data repositories, and these were included in FAIR. So these appeared quite a lot. Trustworthy data repositories were mentioned a lot as well. Using ones that are certified, Core Trustio was mentioned quite frequently by different areas. Those that support persistent identifiers, that are rigorously governed, that cater to specific research domains or disciplines, and that are connected to larger infrastructures. So the key point that I'm getting at here is trustworthy data repositories that are committed to long-term preservation are seen as a good choice, even for immediate data sharing. The more social side about networks and that sort of thing was also mentioned frequently. The social science section of the guidelines gave specific guidelines about how to preserve data in ways that facilitate anonymization and security of sensitive data. So looking at the downstream sharing of data, which again is a kind of preservation issue because it looks to the future. And then the role of software and software preservation was also highlighted quite frequently. So coming to the conclusion here, the importance of context in preservation is something that I want to highlight. So metadata was discussed as usual, but it went beyond that. So one of the quotes here I'll read out is that social scientists should make available and deposit data in a repository with all of its documentation, such as code books, lab journals, informed consent form templates, which are important for understanding the data and combining them with other data sources. So the awareness of what goes into preserving that research data and that research software and what else should be included was underlined. So if you're thinking, what should my repository do, or what do we need to look at for digital preservation, that larger context was deemed very important in the COVID-19 case. And researchers should also make available information regarding the computing context relevant for using the data, software, hardware configurations, syntax queries, and so on, and deposit it with the data where possible. So I guess my last conclusion to draw here is that there's a very clear understanding that COVID data, COVID-19 research data, if preserved, could assist with future pandemic preparedness, and that consent and documentation alongside preservation is key. And the duty to document that was put out by the DPC and others is referenced within these guidelines. Still some lack of clarity on the distinction between storage and preservation. So storage was referred to both during the research process and also for access and reuse in the future. So I would use the word preservation there instead, but as chair of the editorial team, I wasn't allowed to edit every single word. However, and this is my last point, preservation was mentioned 40 times over those 143 pages, repository 99 times, and again, desirable repositories were defined as trustworthy data repositories committed to the long-term preservation of data. So thank you. If you want more information, you can go to the collaborative doc, and I've got links to everything that I've been talking about here.
Thank you, Natalie. Your time was perfect, just under 8 minutes. I didn't feel the need to ring the bell because I thought you were going to make it in time. Yeah. Okay, so I think we have time for one quick question and one answer. Jen, is there one question?
No, so there's no questions in the chat at the moment, but that doesn't matter. Do feel free to just unmute your microphone.
I see we have Ingrid Dilo saying, if you're interested in trustworthy digital repositories, you should visit session 4, stream 2 to see about the trust principles. Ingrid, of course, was another co-chair of the RDA COVID-19 working group and wears many hats. So,
yeah, thanks for that. So is there any questions for Natalie?
I'll be around.
Yeah. We can do them in the Q&A if there are any questions popping up from everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great piece of work, and it's something that I've been following not as closely as I should, but something I've been aware of ticking away in the background, and I've been really impressed by the speed of response from the RDA on the in crisis. So
massive worldwide effort to try to share data. So any little bits that can make parts of it better, I think, are a step in the right direction.
Well, thank you. The next speaker will be Kaylin Smith and Sarah Day Thomas about rapid workflows for rapid collection, preserving responses to COVID-19. Kaylin and Sarah, please go ahead.
Kaylin, if you're speaking, I think you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, yeah.
Oh. Sorry, I'm having technical issues here with turning on the mic whilst sharing my screen. Right. So thank you for coming to our session. My name is Kaylin Smith. I'm head of digital preservation for Cambridge University Library, and I'm presenting today with Sarah Day Thompson, digital archivist at Edinburgh University. So we're speaking today about the workflows that we set up to collect digital materials created in response to the pandemic, and workflows that allowed us to collect whilst we are working from home.
So we'll focus on where the motivations for our different universities collecting COVID-19 initiatives, what they were motivated by, how they were similar and how they were different, as well as how we developed those workflows and different procedures, and also highlighting where they were different and trying to talk a little bit about why those approaches were a bit different.
Right, so there are many different types of digital materials across Cambridge University Library's collections, one of which are the official records of university bodies. And we saw these materials about the pandemic as another type of record that we would like to collect, one that documents changes to work, leisure, social life at this time, and those created by members of the university community as well as the wider Cambridge community. We think that these will be valuable primary sources that will help support research right now as we try to understand this period in time, and also support future research when we're looking back upon it. We also were aiming to prevent gaps in knowledge. We knew that we were the only collecting institution in the area that was looking to collect materials about the pandemic created by Cambridge members, Cambridge community members. And also, too, these materials are things that might not immediately jump to mind when thinking about a library's collection. So there are people's diaries or journals, photographs of being out and about and documenting Cambridge during this time, children's drawings, other types of materials that help us document this moment. And we also wanted a way to engage our communities whilst working from home. We know that our readers really miss being on site to conduct their research. And this is a way that we can engage with them while we work from home and provide an opportunity to help build a library collection if they so chose.
So at the University of Edinburgh, we put out quite a broad, very general call for members of the university's diverse and very varied communities, from staff and students to researchers to anyone affiliated with the university, to send in their materials documenting their experience of COVID-19 and the lockdown. We're also motivated to capture the university's decision-making, such as guidance for staff and students that might be happening outside of normal channels just due to the crisis around the pandemic. We're also hoping to capture some representative sort of research activities around the virus and lockdown, so not research data, the way that Natalie was discussing, but just to give a flavor of the type of research that University of Edinburgh researchers were involved in. But overall, the main motivation was to make sure we are being proactive, acknowledging that in times of crisis like this pandemic, that resources and attention are often diverted as they should. So doing our part to make sure we're avoiding gaps in the archive and gaps in memory.
So moving on to our workflows, when thinking about Cambridge's workflow, I really want it to be pragmatic in the approach, wanting to use tools that were already supported by the university and ones that myself and my colleague Jackie Cox, who's the keeper of the university archives and the other main contact for this collection, were using already, and hopefully two things that were already familiar to our donors. So moving on to our workflow diagram, it begins when a potential donor gets in touch via email to express interest in depositing their materials. We then add their query to what we call our donor spreadsheet, which tracks every query that we receive. Jackie then undertakes some appraisal of the materials to determine whether or not they fit the scope of our collection. If they do, we set up a G drive that only ourselves and the donor have access to. We've created a metadata template in Google Sheets that's included, and this provides examples of the types and the structure of descriptive and rights metadata we'd like to receive along with the digital files. The donors then added as a contributor. We ask them to read and agree to the donor agreement that outlines the terms and conditions under which they're depositing, update the metadata spreadsheet and upload their files. Jackie then confirms that the materials have been received as expected. We update the donor spreadsheet and that ends the workflow. So it's really kind of simple to use and also adaptable based on our own experience of supporting this workflow, as well as feedback from our donors. We've also been creating catalog records within Archive Space, our AMS at the library. We've been contributing to the UK Web Archive through their annotation curation tool. These are websites that are being created by the university and other members of the Cambridge community. And we've also done a lot of work to publicize this collection, including creating our own web pages on the library's website, publicizing through social media, especially Twitter, and also on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
At the University of Edinburgh, our original call out did include an email, really encouraging the university's communities to get in touch with us with questions or expressions of getting involved. But we then launched a couple of weeks after the call went out, a bespoke in-house built web-based submission form to allow contributors to deposit straight to a central location, each deposit with its own sort of automatically generated UID and a handy JSON file with all the metadata in it to make later processing a bit simpler. We also have been working with guidelines for handling records of particularly difficult circumstances, acknowledging we're asking contributors to send us documents of potentially very traumatic experiences. So doing that both in our procedures and in our communications. So the initiative is run by a project team of archivists, but we are working with an advisory group made up of members from across the university in some collaborative appraisal. And for the first time, the university is using web archiving tools and setting up some systematic web archiving, mainly through a collaboration with the UK Web Archive, but also using tools like Web Recorder for manual capture. And next slide, please, Kaylin. And just to show you a quick snapshot of our digital submission form, quite a lot of time and not a few arguments went into the development of this, balancing to make sure we were capturing enough metadata around the contributor and their submission, but making it really simple and easy to use, even for members of the community who had maybe not interacted with the archive before.
Right, and we'll conclude here with some benefits gained from setting up these workflows. So at Cambridge University Library, it's certainly provided more experience with acquiring born digital archival materials. Prior to this workflow, digital materials arrived on handheld media for our archives. So this is another way to get digital materials into the library. We have a better understanding of communicating with our donors. So what kinds of questions should we be asking around the acquisition of digital materials and deposit? What questions might they have for us? Are we communicating instructions in a way that's clear and allows the donor to undertake the steps we need them to?
Kaylin, sorry to interrupt you. You're over 8 minutes. Is this your final slide?
We have a thank you slide, but this is the last one with content.
Okay, thank you.
So building on those 2 points, it's provided knowledge and capability that we can apply to other collecting scenarios and allow us to collaborate across the library to support this workflow and also think about wider considerations around setting up a digital preservation service.
So with our time up, I'll just say a couple of things that have been really concrete benefits. One is this web-based submission form with a resource that we got for the Collecting COVID initiative to develop this form. We're hoping to extend and use for other types of digital collecting, and a web archiving pilot program, which has got web archiving on the agenda that we can hopefully build on and expand in future. So thank you. Please get in touch if you have any questions or are interested in a follow-up.
Okay, thank you, Kaylin and Sarah. Jen, do we have one quick question, perhaps, before we go to the next presentation?
Well, I think the quickest question is probably from Ali, saying, have you been collecting the social media output of the university relating to COVID?
Sarah's probably a better place to answer this question. It's not something that we've been pursuing right now.
So alongside our open call, we are also actively trying to identify and select content, realizing that not everybody across the entire University of Edinburgh will have seen the comms or heard about this. So we have been identifying social media channels that have significant responses to how the university is dealing with the pandemic. So at the moment, our plan is to capture those using Web Recorder, but we do hope where relevant to do some additional capture with tools that use the API like Tags, which is based on Google Sheets, or Document the Now's Torque tool.
Thank you. There's some more great questions, but I don't think we've got time, have we, Niels? But we might come back to them because we have a bit of time at the end for the Q&A.
Yeah, let's do them in the Q&A, and we keep the questions for there. So next will be Tony Sand from the University of Salford. about rethinking digital preservation training in a time of crisis. Tony, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll start my presentation. Let's see, here we go. That should do it. So yes, that's indeed the title of my presentation, which was also the title of a training event we organized last July, and that's what I'm going to be speaking about. This comes from our ongoing collaboration within the Digital Curation Lab at the University of Salford with two organizations. Well, actually, it's one organization that's run by another organization, which is the Photographic Collections Network. And the Photographic Collections Network is managed by RedEye, the photography network. I think what I'm going to be speaking about essentially is part of our ongoing plans to provide training in digital preservation, and more specifically, perhaps digital curation in relation to that. Here's where we operate. We're based at Media City, and this is the environment where we wanted to have this event. It is an environment within which there are other organizations, some of which we work also closely as an institution, rather than necessarily through the Digital Curation Lab. You see the Imperial War Museum North, the Lowry, which is essentially an art center here in the north of England, the BBC and ITV need no introduction, of course. They're known internationally, and we are the only higher education institution within this environment that's created here. And so it's understandable that this is an attractive environment within which to have an event. And the event that we organized was basically arranged for three types of people, really. Training for anyone working with collections or archives of digital media, particularly people, for whom this is new, or they're looking to improve their practice or increase their access, or even setting up new digital collections or archives in this case. Again, the range of members within these organizations is fairly large, going from individuals to large museums or even libraries. Also, anyone with issues around preservation or curation of digital material more generally, but also specifically anyone whose organization is concerned with managing digital assets and collections, particularly if they're looking to improve digital preservation policies and programs. You'll forgive me, there's so much text on the slide, but my computer setup is such that I'm not able to have two screens at the same time, and I don't have a printer to print things out. So in essence, the description that you see here on the slide is how we were presenting this. The Digital Curation Lab here at the University of Salford and Media City UK teamed up with RedEye and the Photographic Collections Network to offer a two-day online training and exploration event in collaboration with the Digital Preservation Coalition, of which the University of Salford is a member for some years now. The program contains training sessions from the Digital Preservation Coalition, knowledge sharing conversation in a World Cafe style, and keynote provocations by world-class specialists exploring the strategy and policy side of digital preservation programs and the curation of digital objects. Now, we made it also clear that this event was not limited to the digital preservation of photographs or art objects, which are the two areas that our organizations specialize in, but we would also deal with preserving a wide range of audiovisual materials, aware, of course, that collections aren't always beholden to just one format, really, particularly in this case. So we needed to make, this was the event before COVID, and these were the adjustments we made. The main adjustment we needed to make was, well, we couldn't have this in the physical space anymore. And so we decided to, of course, turn this into a Zoom event like so many other events that were not canceled, that they were reimagined. But then we changed the narrative a little bit. Originally, the event was going to be called Preserve or Die. And with so many people dying from COVID, we thought this was most inappropriate, of course. And so instead, we went for this different name, but also this narrative that during the COVID-19 lockdown, we've all become acutely aware of one of the most essential values of digital preservation, which is to say remote access. And again, you'll forgive me this slide with lots of text on it. I promise you it's the last one like these that's going to enable me to read some of the things that we were presenting in a public facing way. Working from home is problematic, especially when we keep in mind that rather than working from home by design or choice, we're actually at home during a crisis trying to work. And hence also these very, very text heavy slides that I'm using here would not normally be how I'd be presenting probably. In any case, primary access to collections is now digital more than ever, and this brings the need for better understanding in digital preservation and the development of skills for digital curation to the fore more than ever before. So making the case for and delivering a program of digital preservation is still a tough and expensive challenge, but perhaps lockdown will help everyone understand its importance. This was how we went into the event. We had a total of 96 attendees who registered for this two-day event. 36 were DPC members, 31 were from the Photo Collections Network, 21 were Red-Eye members, and 8 were associates of the Digital Curation Lab. Some of the people who delivered the training during these 2 days included these 4 wonderful keynote provocations that we had. You see the names of Jeff Belknap. Some of you may even know him as the head curator from the National Science and Media Museum Group here in the Science Museum Group here in the UK. Peter Crow, who's a well-known photographer, author, and technologist based in North America. Andy Mabbitt, a Wikipedian author and digital and open content consultant. And the head of collections management at the V&A Museum in London, Marion Crick. Of course, we also had DPC traders, and again, many of the attendees here will be familiar with at least one, if not both of these names, Amy Curry and Sharon McMeekin, of course, and the 5 modules that we had and the 5 training sessions that we had through the DPC that, of course, again, many delegates at this gathering will be aware of. So, you know, I bring this to a close simply by telling you a little bit about the Digital Curation Lab, and this is the training we normally offer. We offer fully accredited higher education postgraduate courses, a postgraduate certificate in digital curation that was always designed as a distance learning only thing, and also our Masters by Research and the PhD in digital curation. We're always open for collaboration, regional, national, international. You can find us on Twitter there. And that's our website. And I better stop there. Otherwise, this starts sounding like some publicity material or marketing for the Digital Curation Lab, rather than me sharing with you how we adjusted to COVID in our training for 2020. That's it. That's it for me. I'll stop sharing, and I'm happy to take any questions for clarity or wait till later, depending on how you want to run this.
Well, thank you, Tony. Yes, let's do one quick question, if there is one.
Yeah, there was one actually in the chat from Rachel McGregor. Do you want to ask that yourself, Rachel? Or shall I dive in?
Yeah, I can do that. Yes, Tony, do you think you got more people attending because it was a completely online event? I've been thinking that a lot of events have seen, you know, the numbers go up because in a sense they're more accessible now. We're all forced to be at home. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that and,
yes,
you know, the future.
Indeed. I mean, we definitely got more people registering than we probably would if we held it within the physical space. But also the other thing is we didn't charge for this event. So this was a free event, not only in the way, you know, DPC training events are free for members normally, but also because we didn't have the usual expenses we would have, you know, like catering, which is essentially normally what costs the most, and travel expenses, you know, and accommodation for visiting speakers and that and trainers and that sort of thing. So I think if we were to charge for it even a nominal fee, the numbers would probably go down. And if we were to charge our regular fees, as we do, say, for our regular training courses, you know, our postgraduate certificate, our master's, our PhD, then the numbers, of course, you know, come into much smaller figures, don't they? So that's it. Thank you for that question.
Well, thank you, Tony. I think I forgot to ask for a round of applause or a thumbs up at the first 3 speakers. So if you, yeah, I see them coming already. Okay, thank you very much. At the end of the session, we will do a big applause, of course, for everyone. So let's continue to the next 2 speakers, Lynn Bruce and Eve Wright from the National Records of Scotland, about from WHR to WFH, an eventful first year in #DigiPress. Lynn and Eve, please go ahead.
So let me just share my screen. Okay, there we go. So today, my colleague Eve and I are going to be discussing our experiences of our first year in digital preservation and the impact the pandemic has had on this. So unfortunately, Eve couldn't make it in person today, but she's recorded her talk and I'll play it for you as part of the presentation. So the title of our talk is, of course, from WRH to WFH. This year is WRH, or West Register House, as it's more formally known. It's an old church. It was converted to be an archives building in the 1970s, so the inside maybe doesn't quite match the outside. But it is the home of the National Records of Scotland Web Continuity Service. This service has been running since 2017, and it's for organisations who deposit their records with NRS. So I have outlined on the slide here how the service works, but the key thing really is that this is a permissions-based service, so we work very closely with our stakeholders, firstly to get permission to crawl, and secondly to make sure those captures are as good as possible, because NRS view websites as being part of the public record. So I became web archivist in November 2019. I have responsibility for the day-to-day running of the service, and I'm supported in this by my colleague Barbara Fuentes, who's responsible for quality assurance. Prior to becoming web archivist, I was working on a Wellcome Trust project while I completed my archives degree. So I arrived in November really with kind of a very limited knowledge of web archiving. By March, I was kind of feeling that I was maybe beginning to grasp the basics, and then of course the pandemic began. And our team quickly realised that we were going to need more than 230 crawls to capture all these historic changes. So from the 1st of May, we began additional collecting to document the impact of the pandemic. And again, I've laid the details out here on the slide. This means that we are now effectively running 2 services. This has been exciting and rewarding, but also fairly challenging. We knew that we couldn't run this service like our regular service. We simply just don't have the resources. So we had to decide what our priorities were, and we've had to adapt, and I have to say, continue to adapt our processes accordingly. This has meant, for example, doing less, but more focused quality assurance. But I think by being clear about our priorities and managing expectations, we have managed to stay resilient. We've also been really lucky to have had help with quality assurance from colleagues from other parts of NRS. One thing we've learned about this is that Skype is not maybe the easiest way to train colleagues in quality assurance, but it's really been well worth the effort, and the help from those guys has just been fantastic. And support generally from NRS colleagues has been key in other ways as well, in particular with stakeholder engagement. We have been doing a really big stakeholder engagement push to bring more sites into the web archive. We were a bit worried that clients maybe wouldn't have time for web archiving, but actually the opposite has been true. And overall, we've had an incredibly positive and enthusiastic response. So I think there's maybe a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, it builds on the contacts and the relationships that the Web Archive has built up over the past 3 years. But perhaps more importantly, we feel that stakeholders are increasingly recognising the value of capturing websites, and that's really been driven by their role in communicating information about the pandemic. So site owners have really been very keen to have this acknowledged by having their websites added to the COVID-19 collecting. So although it's been a very busy and challenging time for the Web Archive, it's also been really positive. And I know that what we've learned during this time is definitely going to inform how the service is going to develop in the future. So I'm now going to pass you to my colleague Eve. Let me just get her up on the video. Hopefully you can hear this. We tested it before.
Okay, so apologies, I wasn't able to attend We Miss iPres in person, but I'd just like to add to what my colleague Lynn has been saying. With my experience of coming into National Records of Scotland and learning the ropes of digital preservation while in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me just awkwardly share my screen. Okay, so I started as digital records archivist at National Records of Scotland in November last year. My role at NRS is to manage born digital records coming into NRS's custody by way of our digital accessioning service. I also provide technical guidance and support to our depositors and troubleshoot any preservation issues that occur in the files we receive. Before starting with NRS, most of my experience was from a private sector records management environment. So coming into a role where I was working in a historic building in Edinburgh's New Town as part of the core archive for the people of Scotland, yet at the same time was having to get to grips with the technological and intellectual challenges of preserving digital records was a fair challenge, but very much a welcome one. I started at an exciting time at NRS as the digital accessioning service was experiencing significant changes. We had just migrated our digital archive to new server storage. The benefits of this change were substantial. It not only gave us further storage capacity to deal with increasingly larger and more frequent digital transfers, we are now able to access our digital repository from our office in West Register House and not another building that's more than a mile away. These changes streamlined our whole setup, and while our processes are still much more manually focused than we would like, we all felt that it was a significant step in the right direction. Things seem to be ticking along nicely. We were clearing the backlog of records to be transferred to our digital repository and making small but significant changes to our processes. And then 2020 happened, and I don't need to tell you that this put a bit of a spanner in the works. Our digital accessioning service in regards to the physical processing is effectively paused while remote working remains the norm. What that has given us is a chance to take a deep breath, take a step back, and to really think about what we need to do now to respond to the pandemic and what we need to do to improve our processes in the short term and in the long term. For us, a core aspect to the pandemic response was to identify a method to capture the Twitter content generated by Scottish bodies to communicate public health information. We felt that this was a missing piece in the puzzle in terms of our accelerated web crawling for COVID-related content, as government bodies were increasingly using Twitter to quickly and easily communicate information to the public. What we did have at our disposal was our BitCurator PC that Lynn and I managed to rescue from West Register House ahead of the building closing. This PC has been a core part of my remote working setup, as it has allowed me to research and test software. For Twitter archiving, we identified Social Feed Manager was the apparatus that best suited our needs, and we're currently developing this service with our colleagues at Internet Archive. We've also taken advantage of this pause in records processing to refresh our depositor guidelines for born digital records. We've provided our depositors with more detailed instructions for how to put manifests together, including clearer description of our minimum metadata fields. This will no doubt help us to simplify our transfer processes once the service resumes. In a broader sense, we have taken advantage of this pause in operations to look to the future of our service and how it can be improved in the long term. We're working towards implementing a network transfer mechanism that will reduce our dependencies on encrypted hard drives, and as part of a wider digital archiving programme, are investigating how we can use automation to minimise time-consuming manual tasks that are part of our current setup. Now, I'm in the quite unusual position where I've now been a working from home digital archivist for longer than I was in the office. This is very much my new normal. What I feel the pandemic has provided is to develop my own skills and knowledge, and also for us to make significant developments with the service itself, which is no small thing.
Thank you very much. This is our email here if you want to get in contact. Thanks. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Lynn and Eve, for your presentation. Please give a reaction if you like this presentation. And so let's do one quick question and then move on to the last presenter.
Yes, there's just one question in the chat from Natalie about permissions. Do you ever get anyone saying no?
I think people don't tend to say no, but they do. But there are reasons why we don't manage to archive websites, and that's largely down to sensitive data and more commonly, I would say, copyrighted information. So because we publish websites directly onto our portal and it's there permanently, we just don't take copyrighted information. So we work really closely with website owners, and we try to kind of find ways to mitigate this and to kind of get around it. But sometimes there are reasons why people can't. I'd say it's more of a can't rather than a won't give permission. One thing we did for COVID is we normally ask site owners to fill out a permissions form. So it's quite quick. It should only take them about 30 minutes to do. But because we kind of realized that the stresses that organizations were under at the moment, we kind of did away with this, and we've said for the moment, obviously we want this in writing later on, but for the moment, simply an email. So confirming that there's no sensitive or copyrighted issues is satisfactory for the moment, and then we'll get the permissions form in due course. And again, I think that was really quite effective. So.
Well, thank you, Lynn. Then we go to the last presentation of the session. That's from Stephen Mackey and Hannah-Marie Hinchcliffe. And it's about health data preserved in world first archival projects.
Thank you, Niels. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Mackey. I'm joined with Hannah-Marie Hinchcliffe, and we're talking about what we think is a unique project in the world, which is a generation of a national health archive in Norway. I was the project manager for this project working for PICL in Norway. Hannah-Marie is the system owner at NHA. Hannah-Marie will give some background on the project. I'll talk a bit about the system and its deployment and on the lessons that we learned. So Hannah-Marie, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. Our legislation is found in the Health Register Act, and it provides a legal basis for the establishment of a health archive register with the health code regulations. The Health Archives Register was established in the Norwegian Health Archive. The Health Archives Register will consist of all material submitted to the Norwegian Health Archive. All hospitals, both public and private, are obliged to hand over their patient archive material to the Norwegian Health Archive 10 years after the death of the patient. The Health Archives Register will contain information on all deceased patients who have received healthcare from Norwegian hospitals. We are a department within the National Archives of Norway, but we are financed by the Ministry of Health and Care Services. Yeah, next one, Stephen. In addition to reliable preservation of the patient records, on our mandate is also to make them available to next of kin and researchers. And one of the unique things about us is that historical patient information is gathered in one place, giving researchers the opportunity to access information regardless of treatment or location, and to follow a patient's life all through the life cycle. And they can access large amount of information, search for diagnosis, treatment, patient groups, geographical similarities, differences, variations in disease spread over time, etc. And we believe this is an eternal and new life for the patient records. This year, we should be digitizing 24 million pages in physical patient journals. We have reached about 18 million at the time. And next year, our goal is to digitize 36 million physical pages. And these patient journals that once were physical, we are making them look a lot like the electronic patient journals. We have our own standard, the EPJ ARC, and it's the Norwegian standard for the electronic patient journal. and then we make the digitized patient journal be a lot similar to the electronic one.
Thanks, Anna-Mari. So the overall system deployment consisted of 3 parts. We built a bespoke pre-ingest system for acceptance of the different package types. And as Anna-Mari has mentioned, the system is designed to take electronic and digitized physical submissions. It consists of a core digital preservation system and a bespoke access system, which is called the Health Archive Registry Index, or HARI, which enables searches across the archive to match the 2 use cases, as Anna-Mari described, which is the search for patient next of kin records, or to actually create cohorts of data for research. The overall system is actually deployed in a completely virtualized environment, which is on-site, it's not in the cloud. And we actually built this using a highly automated deployment methodology using open source Ansible and Ansible Tower tools. And for those who don't know, that actually enables us to almost instantaneously build the environment, auto-refresh the environment, so we can actually upgrade with new features. We can employ new publicly available features for the core preservation system. And it can be done in a matter of minutes to actually upgrade the whole environment. We have 3 environments. So we have the production environment, which is running the actual ingest of the health records. We have a QA environment, which is identical to the production, where we can actually run software prior to deployment. So new versions are proven and tested before the deployment into production. And we have a test environment where we can actually do the triage and testing of any issues in the system prior to fixes being deployed into QA. The throughput and scalability of the system is actually a big factor in the design and development of this, as we expect actually a throughput of around 350,000 patient journals per year, and currently running about 450 gigabytes a day. The majority of this are the digitized journals, as the size of the files obviously is much greater than the electronic. And in fact, the volumes have gone up subsequent to the start of the project, because the scope was increased to actually include OCR, so character recognition of the images. And we expect in future to actually enhance this further by starting to do some indexing of the OCR files. So the 2 particular parts of the system which were made bespoke were the pre-ingest. So this was the ability to actually take the EPJ specified packages from hospitals and from the digitization process and ingest into the archive. And we created an automated workflow which accepts 3 different package types. That's the electronic or the digitized, and a kind of catch-all other package type. Allows acceptance of bulk submissions. So the biggest we've actually worked with so far is a 30,000 journal submission. The submissions sort of range from around 3,000 to about 30,000 in each package. And the system performs validation, it unpacks, and in fact we are storing as AIPs which contain single patient information. So we're taking very large submissions and breaking them up into a very large number of SIPs, which then relate to a large number of AIPs. We're validating against external registries. Norway has a number of health registries. There's a death registry, a central archives registry, and we do validation against those. And we're including premise events from outside of the system. So for example, we generate premise events within the digitalization process and pass those through and put them into the archival packages. The system, the pre-ingest process, actually converts the packages into a Archivematica conformant transfer. So we're using Archivematica as the preservation engine. And we're using a very secure method whereby the packages are passed across a firewall, very secure firewall, into a very secure zone, which is where the archive sits. Other half of the system is preservation and access. As I mentioned, the preservation is built around a standard Archivematica deployment. So we're using the generally available code from GitHub. We have 3 working pipelines configured for the 3 different package types. It, of course, is a completely open source solution, and it's standards based around METS premise, and it conforms to the OAIS model. We developed a bespoke access database, which is the HARI. So that is designed. Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're over 8 minutes.
Okay, I'll just finish up. Just the storage, we got 4 copies, 2 geographies and 2 technologies, and highly secure. So just in lessons learned, quality of submitted data is very important, and the validation tools are very important. A lesson learned was that the specification of such a complex system needs to be very collaborative between the supplier and the user, the client, and as such, the partnership with the supplier is crucial to the success of such a project.
Thank you, Stephen. Oh, yeah, thank you, Stephen and Hannemarie. Please give a big round of applause for Stephen and Hannemarie for this presentation, or a thumbs up, of course. So that was the final presentation. We now go to the Q&A. We have about 11 minutes left. Jen, how would you like to? Would you like to use the question in the chat and then?
Yeah. So if there's one question that's aimed directly at Stephen and Hannemarie, so we'll take that. But if people have broader questions that they want to ask in the last 10 minutes to any or all of the speakers, do pop them in the chat or start thinking of them and put your hand up. So there is a question from Rachel McGregor about the workflows and findings from this project, and if they are shared or published anywhere.
Hannemarie, do you want me to answer that?
I could take it as well. I don't believe it's published anywhere at the moment. But I think it will be at the National Archives of Norway pages on the web. We just need an approval first.
That's great, thank you. We've got the thumbs up from Rachel there, and we do find that sharing digital preservation workflows is one of the things that we get asked about quite a lot, and something that we're really keen to see, because the way that you join particular tools together is so interesting and important. There's so many different ways of doing it as well. Okay, so
it hasn't. I need to say that this was it was a really good collaboration between supplier and us as a customer. So we hadn't been able to make this work if it wasn't for the enormous collaboration. So that was really important.
That's great to hear. Brilliant. Okay, so does anyone have any questions for any or all of our speakers? Do feel free to type in chat or put your hand up or just shout out if there's a quiet moment. I've got one if that would help. So I was going to ask, so it's nice to see that lots of the speakers have focused on some of the silver linings almost of the current crisis, in that they've been able to move forward with things they otherwise perhaps wouldn't have been able to devote the time to. And I just wondered whether the speakers felt that the crisis has raised the profile of digital preservation within their institutions in any way, and perhaps whether further benefits might stem from that. Does anyone want to tackle that one?
Happy to jump in, but Natalie, please.
I missed what somebody said.
You go for it, Natalie.
Okay. Well, I mean, our fundamental role is digital preservation, so our profile within our organization can't be raised much on that one, but I do think that data sharing, which I talked about, that requires preservation, that has been definitely raised, and I think in a public kind of way. We see the numbers in the newspapers and online media. We see journal papers coming out with ideas about which face mask works, which doesn't. We're used to getting kind of quick research results, but sometimes also the data behind it. And so there's an opportunity, I think, to capitalize on that awareness and make the links to preservation even stronger. I certainly saw in the group that I was working with, this large group in the Research Data Alliance, a kind of acknowledgement of the preservation side, which I don't always see in the sharing circles. In the data sharing circles sounds like a kindergarten class. People that talk about data sharing in general, think about, often it's about getting it out there and making it open science, all the rest. And preservation underlines that, but it's often forgotten. So I do think that has happened. And one more silver lining I want to mention is that, there are massive and chronic problems with underfunding across the world, because certain countries have money to do this research and to get the vaccines out, and others don't. So those gaps and imbalances are still massive. However, in terms of know-how, technical know-how, social know-how, when it comes to preservation and sharing, my sense of coming out of this group is we have it. We just need to roll it out more equally. So, not that that's a small task.
Thanks, Natalie. Did you have something to say, Tony?
Well, yes. Aside from this, or rather in relation to this, also the other thing that did come up was one I mentioned perhaps too quickly in my presentation, is this idea of access and remote access. Clearly, digital preservation affords the sort of access that some people have been demanding and craving during the current period, where in many cases we don't have the sort of access we had previously to physical materials that are preserved in a static way, perhaps, or within archives, within museums, within the sector broadly. So I think this, from our experience at least, and particularly in preparing this training event I mentioned, but also as an educational institution, the idea of remote access, and also because so much of our training, not just the kind of training I was speaking about in digital preservation, but most of our teaching in the higher education institutions, at least, is moving online, and moving online not in a way that it was designed for distance learning, but then having access to these materials that are organized, perhaps, and all sorts of things, particularly relating to intellectual property rights, naturally. So, the level of access, the types of access. So what it's definitely done, if not raise awareness, is it started difficult conversations happening more that we, as people involved in digital preservation, have tried to have previously, through honing our elevator pitches and organizing our digital preservation policies and whatnot. But now, we find more willing listeners, shall we say, if not people who start the conversation themselves, who are coming from within the broader institution into these kinds of ideas.
That's great, thanks, Tony. Lynn, you've got your microphone unmuted. I wondered if you were primed and ready to speak there.
Yeah, just to say, I think that definitely within our organisation, within NRS, it has kind of helped create opportunities to talk about our work with the wider organisation. So for the social feed manager work, for example, that Eve highlighted, which we're using to collect Twitter, this is an entirely new service for us. So that kind of the discussions happened about that right at the top of our organisation, which was really encouraging. And the same as with the additional COVID collecting, we had to put in a business case which had to be approved. And again, that involved discussion with colleagues across the board. So I think it has raised our profile in that way. And also it's just kind of encouraged collaboration, because as I say, we've been working with colleagues kind of quite closely to kind of work with clients who kind of organizations who deposit their records. And I think the web archiving and digital preservation has become a lot more closely tied in with these. You know, it was always tied in before, but it's just kind of really, really emphasized the fact that we are all moving to digital, and that web and social media are going to become even bigger parts of an organization's deposits in the future. So yeah, it has been positive in that sense. And again, even with the client, we kind of talk about our clients, our site owners, I think with them as well, the opportunity, as I said, to kind of contribute to this collecting has been a kind of a real driver for them to join the web archive. So it has definitely, I think, raised our profile. It's been really good in that way for us, but challenging as well.
Great, thanks. There is an interesting question from Jess Green in the chat. I'm aware we've only got about a minute left. So if anyone's got any quick responses to Jess's question about partnerships between archives and contact tracing apps. Maybe you could also follow that up in the social event later on as well. But Natalie, you've replied in the chat, so thanks for that. I guess people might have things to say about that, but not things they could say in 1 minute.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, thank you all. I think it's time, it's 12:40 here. Yeah, first of all, if you would like to open your microphone and maybe even your video and give a big round of applause to all the speakers. Yeah, that sounds... That looks wonderful. Thank you very much. And also thank you, Jen, for co-chairing this session. So right now there will be a 15-minute break, and afterwards at 12:55 Central European Time, the streams will continue. And to remind you, this was stream 4, but stream 4 is off from now. So you have to go to stream 1, 2, or 3. So thank you very much, and hope to see you in one of the next streams. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.